All righty. Well, thank you all so much for joining our spooky Halloween themed Mentor Monday session. We have some fabulous panelists here. Currently, we have Hillary, Ani, and Anais. We'll go around and kind of introduce ourselves before we get started. So hi, I'm Nicole. If you were here at last week's session, I was also there as well as Hillary. But I am in MS3, just started my discovery year, currently studying for step one. All right, maybe Hillary, you want to go next?
Hi everyone, I'm Hillary. I'm currently an MS2 and I just started my clinical rotations.
I guess I'll go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Anais, MS3, currently also in discovery year and studying for step one.
Hi, I'm Ani, also MS3 and currently in the study year.
Hey, Janice, if you wanted to introduce yourself as well.
Hey everyone, my name's Janice. I'm a fourth year medical student at UCLA and I'm applying into internal medicine.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get this session started. So we'll kind of talk about there'll be two different parts to this section or this session. So fears about kind of the application process and before starting medical school, what you thought your fears were, as well as sort of our fears during medical school, what actually was kind of crazy. Um, so first we can talk about our fears before starting medical school. So first we can talk about, the application process. What fears did you guys have during application season? Were you worried that you needed a perfect MCAT, a perfect GPA, perfect activities? Were you worried about the interview process, the actual application writing process? There's a lot to touch on here. Maybe we can start with Janice.
I think one of the biggest fears I had, well, actually, I think the entire like road to medical school was scary for me, because I didn't have a mentor kind of guiding me throughout the process. Mentor as in like even an upperclassman or like a faculty mentor, for example. So I think the lack of a mentor was, um, I think the biggest thing for why I was scared of so many things. So I'll preface with that. So first I was scared about having a gap year. I knew I didn't want to go straight through, but I think there is a misconception in undergraduate where you have to go straight through, and I really don't think that's true. So many of my classmates have taken several gap years and have gained a lot of wisdom and experiences from that and have just like taken a break and like lived life the way they wanted to before like really putting themselves through like really, hard years for the next four. So I think that's a misconception. And if you choose to do a gap year, don't be afraid of it and like really utilize that time to your advantage. Second, I would say application process is scary for anybody. My advice would be to utilize platforms like Med Mentors or find a mentor, someone who's gone through the process and someone you're comfortable with. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to help you. It might take a little bit of time to like find the right person, but once you do, I think that will make the experience a lot better.
Yeah, thanks for those insights. Maybe Anais, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think echoing what Janice said, I also didn't have like a mentor going through the process of applying to med school, so it was really kind of scary all throughout. I'd be lying if I said like one part was more scarier than the next because it was just all, you know, unfamiliar and scary and new, and it was during COVID. So, everything was just unknown and um, kind of very stressful. But I think the key thing is to remember that it is definitely a holistic process. I don't think one thing matters more than the next. So if you are like scared or stressed about your GPA or your MCAT score, it's important to be kind to yourself and remember that all the components of the application are kind of viewed equally. And, one part might be a little less perfect than the next, but it's not going to make or break your admissions process. And also, like Janice said, Med Mentors does have like a one-on-one mentorship opportunity. You guys are looking for like kind of like a private mentor to look through your apps or kind of bounce back ideas or do like mock interviews with. I think that's a great resource to sign up on the platform and find a mentor. I think having some sort of guidance or mentor was really helpful. I did have mentors who kind of helped me read through my essays and then the secondaries because it can become a lot real fast. And having someone kind of giving you opinions and guidance from the side was really helpful. And also, I think one big thing was, again, not like rushing. Like Janice said, I think a lot of people think they have to go straight through, but having that extra gap year in the long run isn't going to kind of make or break the grand scheme of things. So if you do need that extra time to perfect or quote unquote perfect like your application or your essays or whatnot and increase your chances of getting into a school of your choice or a relatively good school, quote unquote, then I'd say I'd favor doing that over like submitting apps kind of prematurely and risking your chances of getting in during this cycle.
Yeah, Ani, any insights?
Yeah, kind of echoing both what Anais and Janice said. My story is pretty similar. I was a first generation applicant. So honestly, when I went into undergrad, like I knew I wanted to go into medicine, but I had no idea like what the route to medicine was like. I barely knew what like the MCAT was. I didn't know like what type of experiences to join and like how to build what they say is like a good med school applicant like portfolio. So it was very like trial and error for me. And I think that as the years progressed, I did like gain mentors during third and like fourth year of undergrad. I ended up taking multiple gap years, which honestly were like probably one of the few best years of my life. Like you get to do a lot during gap years. You grow as a person, you gain a lot of experiences that you then bring to med school. You can travel, you take some time to like wind down. But all of those like bring a lot of perspective that a lot of my classmates like have had multiple gap years, and those are the people that I see like shine the most. And not to say that if you don't have gap years that you're not going to shine, but some people just need more of those time, like more of the time, more of the experiences to get to where they want to be. In terms of like mentors, I do really think it's important to find someone that can help guide you because med school and the application process, like everybody said, does seem a little bit scary when you don't have a lot of insight or you're not familiar with the system. But if there's someone to like help you, give you some tips, like, oh, here you can apply to this school, or like this is like the experiences we would highly recommend. But always remember, like, if you have unique things about you, that let's say you're an art major, a music major, don't be afraid to do those things too to make yourself a very holistic applicant because the application cycle is like everybody said, very holistic. I was the type of student that let's say did have like the almost perfect GPA and I was so worried about my MCAT and I was like, oh, what if I don't perfect the MCAT, then I'm not gonna be able to apply. But like it's it took it took a lot of like prepping and a lot of time to get through the MCAT just itself. It was like a whole beast by itself and kind of getting through like studying for the MCAT and then applying. And I know like I have a lot of like pre-med friends that are trying to apply and a lot of them are just trying to quickly get the MCAT done just so they can apply and like get started with med school. But like Anais said, take the time you need to um, be the best applicant you can be and apply when you are feeling like you are the best applicant. Because it's a whole year, like the whole application cycle, and you want to make sure that you put in your best efforts before you apply.
Yeah, thanks for all of those insights. Hillary?
I think my biggest fears when applying to medical school was um, the application part itself, so like the essays and also the interview portion. As for the essays, I was really worried about my application not telling a cohesive story of who I am. I was just worried that, oh, like I have one idea and a second idea and a third idea and it's all scattered. So what I ended up doing was that I chose about two or three major points, such as like mentorship, research, and some of my cultural activities, and I tried to connect all the other activities or other ideas into those three main points in order to not make it seem like, oh, I'm just doing a bunch of random stuff, like nothing is making sense. Um, for my personal statement, I was also worried about it not being clear, like why I wanted to go into medicine, or sounding too cliche. So then I would have my friends from different backgrounds. So some of them were STEM majors, some of them were like English, or other non-STEM majors. I had them read my essay, my personal statement, a couple of weeks before it was due, so that I had time to fix any part that might sound too cliche or might sound too unclear. And I think that was really helpful just to have different perspectives on my statement. And then for the interview, I was really worried about like getting um, kind of like a stress test where they'll ask me really hard questions just to like stress me out and see how I respond. But in reality, most of my interviews they were very conversational. Most of the time, interviewers just want to know like who you are, what you enjoy doing, like why um, you believe that medicine is a good field for you. So I think I only had like one interview that was somewhat stressful, and others were pretty smooth. It was mostly just like a conversation between two people.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and echo a lot of what the other panelists were saying, in terms of gap years, for instance. So, like a few of the other panelists were saying, I have a lot of med school colleagues who also took various gap years. In fact, I think the majority of people in our class took at least 2 gap years. Some people even took 3. I think there's only a couple people who didn't take any gap years. And that may be sort of unique to UCLA. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that the amount of people who are taking gap years before med school is increasing. But that's not to say that you need to take a gap year. It's just to say that it is an option and it's okay if it takes you a little bit longer to get where you're going. For me, I took 2 gap years just because I needed that extra time to study for the MCAT mainly. And I did take the MCAT twice. So my first score, I just didn't feel was very competitive enough for me. And I was feeling very discouraged, very fearful. I felt like, a failure, but it just took me a little bit more time to study for it. And after I got that better score, I felt better about applying. So there are lots of fears in the application process, but they can all be overcome, I would say. And then in terms of like interviewing, I was also very scared for like the interview process. But I think the best way to go about that is to just do a lot of mock interviews with like friends or mentors. Really just like kind of like write out your story, like Hillary was saying, like those maybe 3 key points that you want to get across. Like maybe you really love to do outreach projects, volunteering, for instance, or maybe you love like mentoring, or you really love basketball, like that's your thing, like kind of have those 3 points that you want to emphasize during the interview process. And then you can just think of like a few stories that emphasize those points to like bring up during your interview. So I think those are some helpful tips. And then just to go back to the other panelists, maybe we should talk a little bit more about gap years, myths during gap years, and what did you do during them if you did take any? Maybe Janice, you want to start us off again?
I initially had a research job. I did undergrad at UCLA, and so I was going to continue the research job that I had. And that's when COVID happened, and I was not able to do that anymore. So, at that time, I had a lot of teaching experience, and I really like working with kids. So, I kind of like switched to that. And it ended up working out. I really love work, and I was like helping kids through Zoom and things like that too. And honestly, it was like completely unrelated to medicine, but it actually came up a lot during my interviews. And I think when you're asked questions in your interviews about like things that you did or what did you like to do, it really comes out if you're passionate about a certain something. So whatever that you do, I think like genuinely be interested in it, seek opportunities to learn from it and grow from it. And when you're asked to talk about it, or like in the way that it has shaped your character, I think it will really come through. So just keep those things in mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. One moment, I think one of our attendees had a quick question. Shreya, if you want to unmute yourself, um, you can go ahead and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat if you want.
Hey, yeah, sorry. Just one question on studying for the MCAT. I think Ani had mentioned the importance of taking your time for you, no matter how much it takes you in order to, study for it. I guess, one concern I had with maybe taking some more time was that it wouldn't be, that means sort of adjusting to the rigors of med school might be a little more difficult, and, just adjusting with that pace since that is going to be very fast paced and things like that. So I guess I just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on that and keeping up with the material in med school.
I can,
Go
oh, you can go ahead, Nicole.
Okay. I can go ahead and start us off on that question. So, like I said, I took the MCAT twice, and I do think it's important to really dedicate at least some time to studying for the MCAT, outside of like working a job, outside of like doing any research, just having some dedicated time is very important. Um, so I think that's part of the key to like mastering the MCAT per se. And then med school work is kind of an entirely different beast, I would say. So like the MCAT is kind of like the hard basic sciences, biology, chemistry. You're learning very specific details. And honestly, that's a bit tougher than what you learn in medical school. Because when you get to medical school, we talk more about like diseases and how they typically like present or how you would see them come up in patients and like how to treat them. And you just hear them so many times, like over and over again, like during first year, you'll learn about these diseases. During clerkships, you'll see the diseases, you will actually treat the diseases. So they'll be pounded into your mind like a million different times. So it's actually not as bad as you think, material wise in medical school, but it does seem like a lot, during first year when all of this information is thrown at you very quickly. That's my perspective. Janice?
I agree. I think that MCAT and like the board exams, for example, and med school are completely different. So I wouldn't really worry about that in terms of pacing. Um, I think I just told a mentee this too recently. I think the MCAT was the hardest exam of my life, truly. Like I've taken both step one and two, and still the MCAT was harder for me. And I think it's because you have a bit more support in med school and it's like very focused towards your exams. And so in that way, it's easier to study. You have like people all around you studying for the same thing. It's like what you're gearing yourself up to. Whereas I feel like MCAT is this hodgepodge of, again, like basic science questions and like a lot of things that you need to know, which in my opinion, like isn't the best way to test somebody, but it is the MCAT and you have to take it. So anyway, in terms of pacing, don't worry. And if you need extra time to work on the MCAT, I think like totally go for it and ask for help as you need. And when it comes time for pacing in med school, I think it's really important to plan ahead. I think that's some advice I would give to my younger self, to plan my studying ahead, to schedule rest days, and when it comes time for board exams, scheduling like even months in advance, like starting to think about when are the months I should start studying, what are some week subjects I should start thinking about. Should I meet with my advisor to talk about anything that I'm struggling with? So there's a lot of support. And I think that you can lean on that support in med school to help you go throughout the curriculum.
Yeah, thanks. And then if the other panelists want to answer both the question about the MCAT as well as what you did in your gap years, if you took any.
I can go next. I do believe like what Nicole and Jan said about the MCAT is I feel like that was probably like one of the hardest exams I've taken so far, but mind you, I haven't taken step one yet. So um, I think like in med school, especially UCLA's curriculum, so we're 1 year didactics versus some other schools who might have like a year and a half to 2 years didactics. It is like drinking out of the fire hose, but I think as the time goes by, you get more accustomed to drinking out of the fire hose, I guess. And it's like life doesn't really stop, so you still have all the personal things going on. You just, I think over time you learn how to manage your time better. And it goes by sections. Like let's say it's like different sections and it's more focused exams, like Jana said. So it's a little bit easier in that sense. But like Nicole said, year one, you're learning like a didactic style, like the lecture-based style, and then year two, you're applying it clinical experience. So you repeat a lot of the same stuff. So maybe something doesn't click year one, but then year two, it starts clicking. So you have a lot of repetition. You learn about like the high yield like medical cases and the diagnoses. Whereas like the MCATs seems like a bunch of like minute details that you might need to memorize in order to like pass an exam or get the score that you want or a high score. And in terms of like gap years, I did take 3 gap years. I initially took a year just to do the MCAT and because it was during COVID, there was a lot of test cancellations and whatnot of like the first COVID year. And then I did apply once, but I applied very like to like 6 schools because I was a late applicant at that time. And then so that was a whole year that went by, and the last year when I applied again, I got into a bunch of med schools. But the point being is during that time I did work in healthcare, but I think it's also important to focus again on your interests, like outside of medicine. And like Jenna said, usually during the interviews, you'll find them asking you a lot about those things that are not medicine related, because those are like the cool things that they want to hear about. They hear everybody's like same medical experiences. Oh, I was a scribe, or I volunteered at this hospital, or I did this, like very like cut out medical student stuff. But then they want to hear about those cool experiences and what you learned from them, and hopefully what you're going to bring from those experiences to medical school. So yeah, I did a lot of like, let's say I was into art, so I did some art stuff. I founded a mentorship program at my high school. Just did a lot of things that I was passionate about. I also traveled. So yeah.
Hillary or Anais?
I didn't take any gap years, so I'll just go to the MCAT question. I feel like MCAT studying is completely different from how I've been studying in medical school. The MCAT was just like a bunch of subjects that I felt didn't really connect with each other, so I was studying for each subject individually. Meanwhile, in medical school, every concept that you learn is somewhat connected to something else that you've learned in the past or in the future. So it feels more holistic, and you're taking in the whole story. So you have your patient story, their symptoms, the imaging, the labs, and you're trying to connect them together to form a diagnosis, which I feel is really different than just like simply answering, I don't know, like physics questions or those organic chemistry um, questions with, like the chair configuration or whatever. I don't remember most of the things that I've learned from for MCAT studying, but I feel that for medical school studying, it makes a lot more sense. And also you have a lot of support from your classmates and also like academic support office. So it is definitely manageable. For those who need more time studying for the MCAT, I would recommend taking that time to study if you don't feel confident or comfortable with it. But I feel that it doesn't really translate well into studying for medical school. So you shouldn't feel that, oh, because I'm taking more time um, to study for the MCAT, then I'm going to be behind in medical school because I'm spending so much time studying or not feeling confident in your studying skills.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Anais, any insights into the MCAT or gap year?
Yeah, I guess just real quickly, everyone kind of touched on what I was also going to say, but just like Hillary said, the MCAT really doesn't define like your study capabilities or like kind of what type of a physician or medical student you're going to be. I think it's kind of just a test to in a way tests like your commitment and discipline into wanting to go into med school, and how dedicated are you to like taking really sitting through that exam and taking it once or even like multiple times, because it is a rigorous and long exam. So don't like kick yourself in the behind if like you take more time, because um, it is, you know, a very rigorous standardized exam that we're not really used to, even as like pre-med students. And you know, your study habits and the tools and like skill sets that you will have in like your study toolbox will constantly change like throughout med school. So don't worry if like you take more time for the MCAT, doesn't mean anything in regards to how you're going to study in med school, because that will constantly change and you'll have more resources. You'll talk to, you know, a variety of different people who help you with your study skills. I personally changed my study habits so much from like undergrad to the MCAT to med school, and I took the MCAT twice, and it didn't really mean anything or hinder, you know, your ability to perform in med school. And then as far as the gap years, I also took multiple gap years, mainly because it was during COVID, but also just because I wanted to focus on the MCAT and then focus on kind of like making the application and my MCAT score as competitive as it needed to be in order to get into, you know, my kind of highly desired schools. Um, and so I think I'm really thankful that I took that time, because I feel like if I rushed it and ended up kind of at a different school or a different location or somewhere like out of state that I didn't want to be at, it would really impact how I performed like in med school. And, you know, all those things matter, and your mental health and your support system. So I think taking the time you need during those gap years and doing really what you love actually helps you in the long run. I also did like a few like research, scribing, and whatnot, but I did some things that I was really passionate about, like mentorship, and also traveled and spent time with family and friends. And I think, you know, looking back, even though during that time it was like, oh no, I'm taking like 2+ gap years, I took 3. I was like really scared and kind of frustrated that it was taking that long. But looking back, it's like all of that was needed to build into who you are today and the future physician that you're going to be.
Yeah, and I definitely want to echo some of that as well. Like I said before, I took 2 gap years. I think the things I mostly focused on in my gap years was I worked for a nonprofit was my main thing, and studying for the MCAT. And those were really my 2 things that I was focusing on. So I spent a lot of time like hanging out with friends as well and like enjoying like dance because I'm a dancer, just like hanging out with family and like finding out who I was outside of medicine, I think was like very important because obviously you're very busy as a pre-med, as you all know, trying to get all your pre-med requirements done. It was a very busy time for me as well in undergrad. So it was very nice to kind of have those 2 years to, I mean, they weren't extremely laid back, but it was like you could take a breath, you know, and kind of figure out who you are outside of medicine. So I think that was really nice. Now we can move on to the second half of this session, which is fears during medical school. So we can kind of go around and say, you know, if maybe the transition to medical school was different, you know, the course load, the coursework, if that was really difficult, or, you know, if the most difficult parts for you were anatomy lab, or if they were like clerkships. Um, Alrighty, so I guess I can start since I'm already talking. So some of the fears for me were just like going into medical school and not being able to, you know, handle the amount of information. I think that was my main fear provided to us. But as I said before, you'll see this information over and over again. Although it seems like very overwhelming at first to me, I think I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to study, quote unquote. So I realized, early on that the material the med school was providing for us wasn't exactly sufficient for my learning. So I needed to, watch YouTube videos to supplement that or, use third party materials such as Boards and Beyond was a very helpful one for me. So I think in that first like semester, first half year of med school, it's very important to like figure out what works for you. And it's also very important not to compare yourself to others, because I remember going into med school and hearing all these amazing stories of, what everyone had done in the past. Everyone was so impressive, in their own ways. And had come from like very different backgrounds. But I think it's important, not to disqualify yourself in that setting. Just know that everyone is feeling a little bit overwhelmed and also feeling like everyone else is amazing and you're just you. But we all get through that adjustment period, and come out the other side. So I think that was probably the scariest part for me. And then the second scariest part was starting clerkships or rotations. Going from that transition to learning material in the classroom to actually trying to apply it to physical patients and like talking to patients and, talking to like attendings and residents was all very scary. But again, everyone goes through that adjustment period where you start your first rotation and you're very scared to like present a patient to the attending or to the resident and tell them what you think you should do for the patient. But after a while, you kind of realize there's just a format that we use to present every single patient, and it starts to just like get ingrained into your memory, and it really isn't so bad after a while. All right, that's my hot take on it. Maybe Ani, do you want to start next?
Yeah, similarly for me, I think year one, I think mostly UCLA's curriculum kind of scared me in the beginning, where it was like, how am I supposed to learn all this material like in 1 year and then move on to clinicals? And I'll say like there were some times where I slacked off or procrastinated, and then there were some times where I was just very focused. And it happens, and I think you learn to adjust your like studying techniques and like the way you approach the material throughout like the different sections that you're learning. Um, and I did like the school has a lot of like tutoring opportunities. They have a lot of like academic resources that you can use to help yourself. Um, it is a big transition again, like drinking out of the fire hose, but I think through time and through experience, you kind of get better with handling the large amount of information that they throw at you and learning how to basically study again. Because I'm the type of person that really likes to write a lot of things, but with the sheer amount of information, it's hard to always just like write down things and process things like that. So then you learn through other stuff. Like learning watching videos really helped me because I'm more of a visual person. So you like it's a lot of trial and error for me, at least year one. And I was so focused on in-house material because I was so afraid of like not passing an exam or not doing so well on an exam. And looking back, I wish I did like a lot more third-party stuff and supplemented with third-party resources and different like videos to help me. And then similarly, I think most medical students are kind of scared of clinical rotations because it's now like applying the knowledge that you're learning from the books. And it's, I think, very challenging to like gather all that information and then come and present to the attending. It kind of gets nerve-wracking when you're like talking to an attending and you kind of still have you're still fresh, so you kind of have no idea what you're doing in the beginning during rotations, but through practice, like you go through a lot of like history and physical, you go through a lot of oral presentation, it kind of becomes natural as you proceed through the rotations. And it was a very big learning curve, I would say, from year one to year two, not only relearning some of the information that you might have already forgotten from year one, but also the shelf exams, which are like exams we take for each rotation that we have at the end. the style of questions that they ask were very different from our in-house party. So it was again readjusting my study techniques. Okay, so now how do I study for these exams? And those shelf exams are more standardized, so all the schools take the same shelf exams. So it's like again, just constantly adjusting your study techniques, constantly like becoming a better like learner and getting used to more time management skills. So I think it's a lot of like it's it's a lot of readjusting the way you're doing things until you find what works best for you.
Maybe Hillary, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I had the same fears. Again, like my first fear was when I started medical school, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to handle the information, or be able to find like a good study method to go along with. And I think it took me a couple months until I like completely transitioned from doing just in-house material to focusing on third-party material and then looking at in-house just to check that I've covered the topics needed. Um, I know classmates who do really well with just in-house material and other classmates do really well with just third-party. So everyone has different study methods, and that's completely okay. You shouldn't feel pressured to do something because because the majority of the class is doing it. Like for example, I never really got into Anki. I tried it a couple of times, just didn't work for me. And I just felt so stressed because it seemed like everyone was doing Anki. And I felt that if I didn't do it, then I would fall behind. But then I realized that if I just kept going with Anki, I wouldn't really learn anything. I would just be wasting my time. So I spent more time focusing on like what works best for me, which was just like reading first aid and um, like doing practice questions was the most helpful for me. And then I just started clerkship like 2 weeks ago, and right before that, I was super stressed because I was worried about not knowing anything. I didn't want the attendings or the staff to think that I was incompetent. And that was my biggest fear. Um, but after I started my first and second weeks, I realized that I knew a lot more than I told myself that I knew. So I just had to learn to be more confident in um, like telling people what I think is going on. And the attendings at the hospital that I'm working at, they've been like very kind and um, helpful. They haven't they haven't gotten upset that I said anything wrong. They're there to help you learn, and you'll learn most of the clinical stuff in your second year. Well, at UCLA, your second year or your clerkship year, and eventually you'll learn to recognize the patterns. Like, oh, like this patient has chest pain and they're presenting with these symptoms. Like, what could this be? And most presentations have like very classic symptoms. So you'll just eventually learn what that looks like. And then from then you'll just feel more comfortable like presenting the story, the patient's story, and explaining why you think they have a certain diagnosis versus something else. So I think before starting clerkship, I had a lot of fears about it, but after I started like 2 weeks ago, most of my fears have like disappeared because I felt I was in a really supportive environment with people who really wanted to teach.
You cut out there at the very end, but I think we got the hang of it. Let's see. Anais, do you want to maybe share your insights?
Yeah, I think similar to what everyone has said, I also had like coming into med school, and for the largest part of like year one, also clerkships is like the fear of kind of inadequacy or imposter syndrome, fear of failing, not being able to keep up. We all know coming in that there's so much information, and so little time, especially with UCLA's new curriculum. I think I was kind of underestimated like how this 1 year pre-clerkship thing was going to be. And just combined with the whole like transition from like a gap, taking gap years and then coming into med school, and also just being like older at the time with different like, life/family stuff going on at the time. It's like you don't account for all these things. So, in the moment, you're just like very overwhelmed, and not sure how you're going to make it through. But somehow, like every block, you kind of develop the skills and strategies needed to, at the very least, survive, if not thrive. Again, every like block was kind of just dependent on you like changing your study skills, whether it was like watching videos for a particular topic versus like just solely like reading first aid or reading the lecture notes. It kind of varied, like block versus block and topic versus topic. Some topics were more like complex and needed like videos. Others, you had to do like flashcards to kind of memorize the anatomy, PowerPoint. So it was like very different. And just realizing that you are going to change your study habits as you go through year one is like very important. And also like not comparing yourself to others, which someone else also said before me. Because, a lot of your classmates are going to come from different backgrounds. Some people were like PAs before, others were pharmacists, others were like nurses for a couple of years. So they have like at least some sort of baseline knowledge or experience that really helps them. And if you end up comparing yourself constantly to like other people and their pace, it really is detrimental to like your mental health, and it could end up negatively impacting you. So I think just kind of focusing on yourself and what works for you, what doesn't work for you was really the key for me. um, and then again with clerkships, like it was said before me, it was also very scary initially starting clerkships, even to the end of clerkships. I think just constantly feeling like, inadequate, or having that imposter syndrome of like, oh, do I really belong? Do I know enough? Especially since we did like kind of zip through the material year one and didn't take boards before starting clerkships. It was kind of really tough to keep up and to fill in the gaps that we missed year one. But, in hindsight, it ended up working out somehow. It just required like kind of perseverance and just pushing through and dedication and reminding yourself, to be kind to yourself and you do belong here. You made it to this point for a reason. And so just utilizing all the resources offered to you and having like proper coping mechanisms for like the stress or the fear is really helpful in kind of getting through it all. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, thanks. Did anyone not go yet? I think I heard.
I
Oh,
didn't, but I think I echo what most people said, so I don't have to go.
okay, no problem.
And Nicole, before we move on to the next, I'm gonna have to hop off soon. I'll drop my email if anybody has any questions or wants to chat or talk about anything. You can always reach me at my email.
Thanks so much, Ani. Alrighty, so we kind of have a few other questions to go through, and we don't all have to answer them, but we can go through them one by one, and whoever wants to answer can just go ahead and, pop on. Um, so if anyone wants to answer this one, are there summer breaks in med school? And do you really have to go to class all day and then study all night and barely have any time for hanging out with friends or going to the gym?
Um, oh, you can go, Anais.
Oh, okay. I'll keep it brief and then you can take over. So I think there's really not one right answer to that, because it really depends on like the program and the school you're at, and how your curriculum is designed. But to speak for like our school specifically in our curriculum, we did have a lot of time to ourselves year one. There was some, classroom time that was mandatory that we had to be there in person for, but there were also, classes that were Zoom, or some that weren't mandatory. And then there was like scheduled personal study time within like the week. You had like a Friday afternoon off, like after 12 or 11 a.m. You kind of had that whole Friday. You had your weekends. So year one was pretty nice, I'd say, and you could kind of schedule yourself however you want. do whatever you want as long as you kind of study and pace yourself during those 8 weeks for that last exam at the end of the 8 weeks. So sometimes it could get, overwhelming if you tend to fall through the cracks a little bit, procrastinate a little bit, and then you're at the end of those, 8 weeks and you're kind of panicking. So you'd have to be careful about that. But there is definitely room for you to, I guess, be a human outside of med school, at least for year one. Year two, which is clerkships, or this could be year three at some programs. I'd say there you have a little less control over your time. Personally, I felt like, the moment I walked in the doors of the hospital, on any rotation, it was like I kind of gave all my independence away to them. Like I wasn't sure what time I was going to have lunch. I wasn't sure what time, I could go to the restroom. I wasn't sure what time I was going to leave. So it's like you kind of just hand over everything to them once you walk through the door. That's at least how I felt. Some rotations were more predictable than others, like when you're like outpatient or you have like strict clinic times, like, okay, you're like 9 to 5. But most of the time, I kind of felt like, I don't know when I'm going to leave today, how long it's going to be, when I'm going to eat, et cetera, et cetera. So second year rotations was definitely challenging, aside from all the knowledge, imposter syndrome and whatnot, because of this particular thing too for me, which was kind of having less time for yourself. And then you just have to come home and study because each rotation's like about 4 weeks, but really 3.5 weeks. And that shelf exam is like at the end of that fourth week. So you have 3.5 weeks of rotation and then the shelf's like on the Friday. So you have to really keep up with your stuff. It's not like year one where you have like, kind of leisure time here on rotations, especially if it's a 4 week rotation and not an 8 week one. It felt more like fast paced, less personal time, less time to socialize, especially if you had weekend shifts. So it really depends on the time point in med school. It depends on your program. It depends on, your personal study habits. Do you need more time to study? Do you need less time to study? So there isn't one correct answer. And I hope that kind of gives a good picture of how it is. But Janice, if you have more to add.
Yeah, it really depends on your program. So, when and if you have invites, really ask what the curriculum looks like. And if you have chance to ask students, ask them what their experience is with the curriculum. I think that'll really impact not only your first year, but the rest of your years. I can only speak to UCLA. So, first year, I thought in the beginning, it was a little difficult because it is a 1 year, like a preclinical curriculum. So, but I think anyhow, like most medical students feel like there's a lot of information being thrown at them. But once you kind of get a hang of what study style you like, and get a feel for what the exams look like and the exam weeks look like, I think towards the end you'll feel a lot less stress. Also, it depends on the block that you're on. Maybe some blocks you pick up on better than others. I actually had a lot of like leisurely time. And if you plan well, you can really plan in study time with vacation time, if you please. Again, that depends with the program. Like some medical school programs I know do like weekly exams, for example. And I know some students that maybe that's not their preference because they feel that they have to use every weekend to study, for example. So that requires more planning and more time management. So definitely keep curriculum in mind when you're choosing a school. And then secondly, um, for clerkships, I agree. Um, it's like a long day of working and then you come back to shelf study, like on top of maybe making dinner and like doing your chores. And I will say it was hard, especially in the beginning, because shelf exams are a whole nother type of beast that you kind of have to get used to. But I will say towards the end, I amassed like a good chunk of knowledge that allowed me to do my shelf exams with more ease than I did in the beginning. So in that way, it's a little bit easier, but definitely schedule-wise really fluctuates. I had several rotations I was on for very long periods of time, like on a given day. So, clerkship year is hard. I did find time to meet with friends, but honestly, I think second year is like the year where you kind of give your time to the hospital and like really put yourself in there and learn. At UCLA, we have a discovery year, so this is like an 8 to 9 month period of like free reign almost. You can choose like research, you can choose to do global health. I don't know if they still offer a master's through this time, but this is a period of time where I had a lot of free time to like do research and do other things. And then I'm currently in my fourth year now. Sub internships are very busy. And at the same time, you're writing your residency application. So that like acute period of time where you're, in the hospital working on your application, very busy, but I'm just out of that period now and I've had a lot of time to travel and see friends, and just kind of catch up on life too. So I think it's like very fluctuates throughout school and when you do have time, like really take advantage of it. And when you don't, like really hustle through it and find the support that you need to kind of get you through, challenging times. Because I don't think anyone will say like medical school is not is easy. There's definitely challenging times and many times like I thought things were going to be too hard for me and eventually I like made my way through, but that's like my reflection now. And I think really it was like my roommates, my friends reflecting that really got me through the hard times. So, and also like playing when I had when I had time.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of summarize all of that. I would say, from my reflections as well, anytime you're on like rotations during rotation year, for instance, or as Janice was talking about, also during sub-Is, those will be your busiest times just because you're trying to impress people in the hospital. You probably have to, wake up pretty early and then stay there for the whole day. And then, usually you'll have something to do at night as well, whether that be studying for your shelf exams during your rotation year or, writing your application during your sub-I year. But, you know, outside of those like rotations, I would say there's definitely time to like hang out with friends. Like first year for us at DGSOM, it was a packed curriculum, like everyone's saying, but I managed to like, make a lot of friends. Like initially, I spent a lot of time like socializing in the very first part of med school, which I think was very nice just to like make friends and like get to know like a lot of my classmates. And then in between like our exams, like we'd usually have an exam on Wednesday or something. So we'd also have like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like 5 full days to just chill and like hang out. So that was really nice. And I even like, was able to like travel one time, like during, after my exam season had ended, basically, which was very nice. So they're definitely, like everybody's saying, it fluctuates a little bit. But I would say like during clerkships specifically, and anytime you're in the hospital doing those long hours, just like still make sure to care for yourself as best as you can, but know that those times will come to an end. It's hard for everybody, but you will get through it. Yeah. All right, now we can kind of pop a few more questions off before we have to conclude in about 7 minutes. But I think one question that we might want to address is how to not get overwhelmed with all the content as well as third-party materials when you first start medical school. Whoever wants to answer can go ahead.
I guess I will go ahead. I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed. I personally focus a little bit more on like in-house stuff, which in hindsight, I wish I hadn't put so much focus on in-house and did more third party. But in the moment you're transitioning to med school, this is all new. So you're just kind of trying to do what works for you in that moment. And hindsight is always 2020. But I'd say just, kind of with each block, it'll vary. Like it was said previously, some blocks will require more digging through like third party resources, other blocks will require less. Some blocks, you kind of just understand the material a little better because it's more interesting for you. So it kind of really ebbs and flows as you go through the year. Um, but to not get overwhelmed, I guess I think repetition is the key, to med school in general. Just try to, repeat space repetition, even if it's not through like Anki, whether it's like questions, whether it's like rereading certain PowerPoints, rewatching certain videos. I think that was really the most important thing for me that worked for me. Um, and also just remembering that it's not possible to know like everything or like the entire first aid book or whatever it may be, just like your first time going through it, like your first year, unless you are really prepping for like step one at the end of that first year. Just kind of being graceful to yourself and realizing that it's not really possible to know it all in that like one pre-clerkship year, because it's all going to come back and kind of repeat itself throughout clerkships and then again through board studying. So as long as you kind of build that foundation and you're able to pass like your school's exams, you're able to, I guess, gather that necessary foundation in order to really just understand and pass those exams, I think you're in a good spot. And then you come again and repeat it, through clerkships, through board exams. So it's like you go through the material like at least 3 to 4 times, and then again sub-Is. So by the end of it, the goal is, to kind of be well versed with the material by the end of the 4 years, not really the end of first year, which is probably like how I myself was also like thinking like, oh, by the end of year one, I was getting really stressed out that I don't know stuff. But just remind yourself that, there's a reason why medical school training and, residency training is so long. It's just because there's so much info and there's certain things that you won't know until you actually like work with the material, work on real patients with it. You'll learn like on the spot, on the job. Try not to get bogged down on like the minute like biochemistry things or certain like cycles or things like that, because again, in the grand scheme of things, when you're clinically treating patients, some of those things aren't really necessary, and you guys will all come to see as you do rotations, you'll pick up on what's like really important versus less important to focus on. So kind of don't overwhelm yourself by thinking you have to memorize every single cycle out there, every single like mechanism for every single drug and whatnot, because again, clinically, not all of it is going to be relevant.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just add on to that a little bit. In terms of, navigating third-party resources, I think it's best to start with one. I'd start with like a very broad one. For instance, like Boards and Beyond is very good. Also, there's a new one called, it's like med school curriculum, or I don't know what it's called.
Boot camp?
Yeah, that's what it is. Boot camp. So boot camp or Boards and Beyond, I just start with either of those because they're very broad. They cover everything, like all the organ systems. So you can just like watch a few of those videos alongside like your class videos and see which resource you like better. Because you can use those videos for every single organ exam that you take. Um, and then you can think about integrating the other ones. Like Sketchy is kind of like a cartoon resource that helps you learn like certain drugs and certain bugs like bacteria, viruses, etc. But yeah, I'd start with the broader ones first before getting bogged down in all the other resources that are available. All right, and then we can, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I have I feel that for me, the one of the biggest things that helped me feel like less overwhelmed and less stressed was just talking to my classmates and my friends and just like collectively ranting about the curriculum or the material, because sometimes you see people studying so hard and you feel like, oh, I'm so behind, like they must be doing so well, like they understand everything. And sometimes when you read the material a bunch of times and you still don't understand it, you think that you're like incompetent or maybe you're not smart enough. But then once you talk to like your other classmates about how they're feeling about like the school material, most people will also share the same sentiments. Like everyone is just, I guess, struggling at some point. You shouldn't think that everyone is doing well and that you're falling far behind. Instead, just mainly like focus on like changing your study method if you need to. and worry less about um, like not doing what other people are doing. So yeah, the main thing that has helped me like de-stress before exams was just knowing that everyone else was also stressed and that I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. During times of stress, it's very common that your classmates will also be stressed. So it's very nice to like lean on them and like vent to them. And it does feel a lot better to know that like others are struggling with you, kind of thing. So definitely lean on your classmates, definitely lean on the upperclassmen as well, just like asking them how they studied for specific tests at your school. Very important because, maybe they can provide you with a study guide or tell you which specific like resources they use to study for that test, which I found to be very helpful. So, anyways, just concluding our session here. I hope you found this helpful. There are a lot of scary things about medical school, mostly like personal, anxiety related. A lot of them are just in our head, but a lot of them are, definitely true fears. But I would say it's definitely doable, especially through leaning on your colleagues, your friends, your family, and like taking a little bit of time for yourself when you can. All right, guys, we'll hope to see you at the next Med Mentors Monday session. And thanks, panelists, for joining. Bye.